Hey everyone, welcome back to Tactical Magic. This is Molly Mandelberg, your host, and I've got a really fun guest for you today. We're going to be talking about transformation, transition, how to find clarity and make empowered choices. And I know a lot of people have been struggling this year with a lot of different upsets and a lot of turns and twists in the road ahead. And so there may be some skills that would support us in finding our path a little bit more easily or finding clarity a little bit quicker. And we're going to be talking about that today. So hang tight. We'll be right back.
It's not just about mastering technology. It's not just about brand or messaging. It's not just about making more money. It's about showing up in a big way so your people can find you. This is about bringing your most wild and authentic self into the hustle and grind. Welcome to Tactical Magic, a business strategies podcast for the warrior goddess entrepreneur.
Okay, Laura Pasquini is a rogue learner, community rabble-rouser, and wrangler of design. As a scholar-practitioner, Dr. Pasquini explores how knowledge, technology, and community influence learning and performance. Her consulting work evolves around the stewardship of technology to improve collective practice, innovate with learning solutions, improve teamwork and collaboration, and enhance work design as we know it. As a coach, Laura helps clients talent wayfind to unlock potential skills and identify their professional expertise to create a work life they want to lead. Welcome to the show, Laura.
Thanks, Molly. So glad to be here.
Happy to have you. So tell us a little bit more. First, I want to hear about the community rabble rousing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think most of the work I have done and learning has been around how do a bunch of people come together and assert change, do something different, or create some sort of revolution. That's been my kind of modus operandi most of my life. And it's been around really good things come together with the power of ideas and people. And so from stuff I studied in my undergrad, which was revolutions within the revolution, the women in Cuba in the revolution, to the Haitian colonized by the French in the colonies, rising up and revolting. So with that, not all change has to be a big force. So a lot of the work I've lately looked at in communities have been, how do we bring together folks from different walks of life to different experiences and have them crosstalk and share? So an example I'll give you that's concrete is we always talk about learning, but we never talk across those who are in the learning fields, whether they're a elementary school teacher, a professor, or someone that's doing professional L&D at a corporate setting. We all say the same things with different language. So I guess part of my work is bringing a common language and a common space where they can engage, realize they're struggling with some of the same issues and challenges, and then work together to problem solve. So bringing community together to work on new ideas, spark new ones, create new things, and just have fun, I think is really important to me.
Yeah. And I love that sort of undertone of revolution, that there's like an evolution and there's also a revolving that's happening. And yeah, with community, when we bring people together to bring the conversation forward, change can happen, and on big and on small scales. So I know you work one-on-one with your coaching clients as well, and that helping them navigate transition and find their way through maybe an uncomfortable place that they're in right now to a place of more passion, empowerment, ease, finding their strengths, things like that. So what are some of the common places that people are in, and what are some of the tools that you help people use to get out of confusion or out of overwhelm and into a place of clarity and empowerment?
Well, I think we ask some really terrible questions when we first grow up. People are like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Is the worst question we could ever ask. And then people put themselves into categories and figure out there's like this one path to get them there. So what I like to do is kind of think about reframing the journey as the end destination is the ultimate thing. And what about stopping along the way, that road trip of life, and figuring out, are there other things you can try out, try on, experiment with? And so a lot of folks would come to me for coaching specifically around their own kind of work life, career, and personal life, because everything, the personal is professional in my mind. So a lot of folks are coming now with a reckoning of, what do I really want to be doing? And they've never stopped to ask them that in 20, 30, 40, 50 years of their life and work. And so it goes back to reflecting and maybe redefining and saying, well, what is the thing I want to be, or who am I, is those identity questions. So I love the idea of our identities are evolving always, and stopping to think about it once in a while is kind of what I do with some of my clients that I coach, and asking them deeper questions of, is this true? And this is what you're saying to me. And what makes that true for you? And I think everyone's path is unique. So it's not necessarily a career pivot or a change, but it might be a career question in the middle of it. And am I liking what I can do? Or maybe I should job craft and do something else a little bit differently, or ask for another opportunity that's going to fulfill me in the world of work that I'm in. Or I just need more time. Could I go part-time instead and do this really cool, fun thing that really fuels me on the side?
I love that. I love the options that are within that aren't necessarily jumping ship and radically changing everything in your life, that there's other ways to find fulfillment and passion within all of that stuff, which is awesome. How did you get into this work?
I always was curious about people's pathways. Like, I loved figuring out what people were doing in their lives that really energized them. That's the end. Like, people like, is it work? I'm like, maybe, but sometimes it's like volunteer. Like, why do people join a community group? Why do people get civically engaged? What's driving them? And so, like, I was a nerdy little kid who went to a bookstore and picked up Do What You Are was around careers, but like, what really got them there may have been their personality or their interest traits or their experience or exposure. So I said, could it be cool to talk to people on their journeys and tell me about how they got into either a role, or how are they working with this team, or what do they do, and why is that meaningful to them? And so for most of my life, I've asked people those questions, and I guess it's been around identity development, and but also, well, what's really getting you up in the morning, and why do you want to do these things, and what fuels them on the daily? And I think for me, I think it's been that inquiry based, being curious about people's pathways, because you're right, not everyone's going to jump and quit a job, and nor do I recommend that now, and especially these times. But it's maybe thinking about what could you do, and what could you try on the side or experiment with, what could you learn from people you connect with, and then how do you make sense of how that fits in who you are now and who you want to be? Because we live different seasons of our lives, and what I was doing 10 years ago is so different from what I'm doing now, but that's just who we are as humans. And we're unique that way. We are seeking other opportunities and other challenges. But unless we stop and pause, was it Ferris Bueller said, like, and stop and look around once in a while, we forget to actualize that and realize that. So that's the neat part of it.
Life moves pretty fast. If we don't stop and look around once in a while, we might miss it.
That's right. Exactly.
I'm a big fan of Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I'm also a big fan of taking day off. So just for those other entrepreneurs out there, because, you know, we have coaches, we have all kinds of leaders on this podcast. What does your work life look like? What's your work-life balance? How do you find that fulfillment and passion in your own life?
It's a great question. I don't know if it's always balanced. That's the honest truth. I think sometimes there's peak work things for me because I'm really wanting to get a program out, or I'm really wanting to launch a new product or service, or I'm just jazzed about the clients coming in. So sometimes there's like a peak, there's some valleys, but it's always checking in with my whole self. Like, am I tending to my health and well-being? So eating right, sleeping at least 8 hours, doing some sort of physical movement each day, and then having some accountability for what I'm writing and what I'm reflecting on. So I try to do that. Does it work all the time? No, but I think it's setting goals. I'm fortunate that my work day, I still, besides entrepreneurship, I have a full-time job. So I have a job that is project-based. I don't need to clock in, clock out. And so having that autonomy and flexibility in my schedule, and practicing being like minded on when do I work best is, I love the book. I think it's called When by David Pink. He talks about, like, when do you actually do deep design work, reflective work, versus when do you connect and collaborate? So an example is I do a lot of time blocking. I, in the afternoon, chat with people more often, because my morning, I want to be quietly writing. I want to be reading. I want to be reflecting and doing some deep research. But then I can have a conversation and sync with peers later on, like this, or for a different podcast or a different event. And I know that that's where my energy shifts throughout the day. So recognizing some of your own patterns and blocking out your calendars to say when you will or will not connect with people. When do you want some deep work time? And then I can turn off the internet and email and log out super easily. So I don't have that issue of checking email on a phone or something when I'm away. When I'm offline and often hidden in the woods. So I'm okay with that. But it's calling into question of like, what do you want to be? When do you want to be on, and how do you want to be on in your work day? It's what I think about a lot.
Yeah, that's super important. This question is just popping for me to ask because you have a podcast. I know you're someone who trades in wisdom and who likes to broadcast a message. If you had the ear of the entire world right now for a moment, what would you most want to make sure that people hear?
I think I would ask the entire world, how are you checking in with yourself these days? I don't know if I have to send a lot of messages these days. I think there's more power in asking some deep reflective questions. And
That's a very coach answer.
It is a very coach answer. Well, and I also think it's going to be unique to each person's experience. So I could give wisdom and pieces of advice, but that's going to be relevant to me versus I could ask you a more personal and deep question, and you're going to have a better answer for yourself. So yeah.
Ask people to check in with themselves. Yeah. Super valuable. And for those people who don't have a practice of checking in with themselves, like what are some good ways to go about doing that?
It could be as simple as you start or end your day with sitting, meditating. It could be writing, reflecting. I love the morning pages is something I do a lot.
Yeah, me too.
A lot of your listeners might do that. So those writing, it could be afternoon pages or evening as well, wherever you need to like have a check-in point. I always like to realize that my list will never get done. So what's the one thing I'm going to work on in the morning? And then what's something I've left when I'm closing out and signing off for the day? What am I going to get to tomorrow? Because there's going to always be another day to work on things. So leaving your thoughts somewhere is really helpful. And then personally, I like a good sweat. So I will go and do something physical to sweat it out. It'll be dancing, it'll be running, it could be cycling, it could be do some hiking with my dog, getting lost in the woods. But I think it's really important to figure out what that looks like for you. Yeah.
Physical aspect for sure. Especially for entrepreneurs. I mean, for everyone, but especially for entrepreneurs when we're sort of forcing ourselves to be self-motivated and when we really can use every hour of every day to be working and getting things done. It's so important to have some sort of a scheduled physical time where you're not just sitting at your desk anymore, where you're actually taking care of your body and getting out there. I recently, a couple months ago, joined Orange Theory, and it has absolutely changed my life. I just love having like an appointment where they're expecting me to show up at this gym and I have to be there. And I love it so much. Having the way that it's structured really works for me. But I wasn't able to do that when I was more, I wasn't willing to try it when I was more on the road. It's been sort of nice to be staying put and trying something like that.
So, I like that idea of scheduling though with yourself. Like I always put random scheduled things, like it seems silly, but put down when you're going to eat lunch or have a coffee chat with someone. Or I don't know, people like don't do it because they're like, that's not work. And I'm like, that's part of your work, even though you don't see it as work.
You more productive.
Absolutely.
Totally. Yeah. And I will schedule like, this is an hour that I'm free this week. I'm putting yoga there and I'm going to do, even if it's only 30 minutes of yoga, I'm going to go do yoga and that break in my day because I know that's going to serve me and support me even more. So you talk about the stewardship of technology. Will you tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah, so a lot of that forms around kind of the community of practice idea and philosophy of we have these technologies and they're not good or bad. They sit on a continuum, but they can do a lot if we are tending to the spaces they're tending us towards. So a lot of communities will engage in online areas. So from social media to other kind of private chat spaces. So I think of the Mighty Networks. I'm in a couple of groups or Slack groups that are a bit more private. Think about in those spaces, who's kind of stewarding the knowledge, the sharing, the ideation, and who's in charge. So when we have these technologies, we often let them make decisions because that's what they do. And we don't own them. But if you're going to be part of a kind of a community or collective or just a partnership in working with others, you want to decide on some parameters of when you use them, how you use them, and what they're used for. Because I think we often talk about use and users, and we never talk about like the means of how these technologies invade our lives or complete our lives or make us feel connected. So I think it's okay to reflect on that. And stewarding technology means you become the one that wrangles and identifies its purpose. Is it meaningful? Like, I'm not going to say you have to Marie Kondo some of your platforms and networks, but maybe you need to check in and go, do I need to be this connected to everyone on LinkedIn, or what's serving me in my use and how I've been using Twitter or Instagram and thinking about that. So it means tending to it and not just letting it be, and saying that's just another thing I'm going to do. Like, thinking about the purpose and meaning of using it is what I think about in stewardship of our use of these mediums and modes.
Yeah. I was just having a conversation about that with someone yesterday, and how overwhelmed she feels by the way she thinks she needs to do social media for her business. And it's like, yes, showing up consistently on social media is valuable, especially when you're running a product-based business. People need to know what you're selling, what you're making, how it's going, and be reminded that you're there so they come and purchase something from you. But there's tools to batch that out. So what if you sat down and did all your social media posts for the week or for the month in one sitting, and then scheduled them, and then you didn't have to think about that for the rest of the month or week? That would be a life-changing thing for her. She also recognized that when she goes on there, she's often going on to post and then she ends up scrolling for a while. So it's like, what would it take to show up on social media to post and to engage after your people comment or whatever, but to not scroll anymore? Because is that actually adding to your life? Is it actually helping? I'll be honest, I get a lot out of TikTok. When I need an energy shift, I will sign on to TikTok and just end up smiling within 10 minutes because there's so much magic on that platform. But if I hang out on TikTok for too long, I'm getting less sleep, which makes me less functional the next day. I'm just like literally swiping my life away. But it brings me a lot of joy. So I use it as a tool, as a device, but it's not actually adding to my business. So I love that idea of checking in, like what's actually contributing to you? What is actually a pattern worth breaking? And where are we being, like you said, the steward of that technology in our life rather than the victim of it or the robot, or the zombie using the robot, you know?
I love that you made that analogy, because people can scroll through Instagram or scrolling through stories. And someone said to me, I really enjoy the stories because I'll comment. Those are friends of mine and I'll engage socially. I was like, well, it is called social media. So you could also choose where you want to be social and show up. And the other piece of advice, I think stewarding yourself on these platforms, sure, you have a business and you want to market and publicize, but it's been interesting to hear a few people compartmentalize. They're like, well, that's my personal and this is my professional. I said, what makes you think your clients don't want to see you personally in different ways and get to know you and build a rapport? So don't discount any of this stewardship, also just being you and being fun and being a real person. And you'd be surprised the interactions of, even if it wasn't a planned post, the responses you get, or the clients will show up because they're like, oh, you did this thing and that's pretty badass. And I really love this. Or I had no idea you're into X, Y, or Z, like weird little hobby, knitting world, whatever it is. And they'll show up and be like, I'm intrigued now. I want to follow this more.
Yeah, absolutely. That authenticity is key. And I know for some people, it feels like inauthentic to keep trying to qualify or quantify our lives into the box of social media. But when you're willing to share vulnerably and be yourself and figure out what authentic feels like for you or looks like for you today on social media, it is a huge gift in other people's worlds to see what's really going on. If things aren't going well, share it. If things are going well, share it. Sometimes showing that you're happy is a beacon for someone who's struggling to say, you know what, joy is possible. Of course, some people might compare themselves, whatever, that's on them. But also sharing the vulnerable truths of when things are going poorly. I happened to be on Instagram before we popped onto this call, and I saw a friend was really struggling and just said vulnerably, like, if you see this, I am having a hard time, please reach out. Or if you're in the area, like, I would love to meet up and I need food. It's like, I just Venmoed her $50 because I'm like, you need food, I got your back. You need emotional support, I'll be calling you as soon as my workday is over. Like, that is okay to ask for support. It's okay to ask for support. And it's okay to use social media if that's the only platform where you know how to do it from. If it's harder to reach out to someone individually or to even know who to reach out to, it's okay to, en masse source that kind of energetic support for sure.
It's okay not to be okay. And I think that's something we don't ever, people always post the happy things. And there's been like, it's funny. So in a past life, I studied how people are using social media, but we always put positive things, but not everything's as it seems in those squares and those boxes and those media. I always think about the idea of like, we actually make our relationships and our clients rapport stronger when we show up as our whatever self, and it's not authentic. Like if you find something funny, share it. If you did something silly or ridiculous, you never know, it might entertain someone else. You might have had a laugh, but someone else could. So it's, I think showing the full emotions and the feels is kind of what we don't do enough of. So I love that you're sharing that message.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's super important. So teamwork and collaboration was another thing that you mentioned, that for people I work with, it's mostly solopreneurs. So teamwork doesn't come up as much. I'm wondering if there are like key components to make someone a good team player. I know a lot of entrepreneurs, I encourage them to, when it's time to get support, learn how to delegate, find a virtual assistant or an executive assistant to support you in your business so that you're not doing all the busy work anymore. And definitely to set up systems now that someone else could take over for you in the future. But there's probably also a lot of people out there who maybe haven't made the leap to entrepreneurship yet, who are working on teams. And I imagine you have some badass like tools to use to optimize that experience.
Yeah, I think every entrepreneur that's successful has never really done it alone. As much as they might be a solopreneur, they haven't. They've had someone or something around them as a support. And so I always think about starting, and this is great, I think your podcast is doing it, is starting a community or a third place is what I think of it. Is there a way that you can connect with other folks within this group and this community itself that you've wrapped around the podcast? Is one example is, how are you building some relationships to support whatever your next thing is, or your transition to be into business full time? I think we often assume that people have always been successful on their own. No, there's a lot of people and probably small teams behind them that never get mentioned. So think about who in your own network, professionally and personally, could help lift you up. And I love that you were thinking like, whether it's a virtual assistant or someone doing cool, creative design things, like think about your network as not just the thing you're doing. So if you're healing or you're doing any sort of therapies or coaching, well, what other aspects do you want to draw out? So maybe you're not a great animator or designer, but could you find other people that like have the same message or philosophy as you? So I think casting out lines right now is really good, and figuring out what you'd like to learn more of, or who can you learn from and be a collaborator, is kind of where I go these days. And I think, Molly, you're good example, is like, we both podcast, and I was like, I'd love to have a conversation and share your background just to expand our networks a bit more and cross-pollinate and share ideas. But I think we could do this better in other domains of work. So just because you're a healer, it doesn't mean you wouldn't have anything to teach a trainer or a learning and development person. Like, I think there's some good cross conversations, even if you're not in that same world of work. I think it really strengthens what you know and what you know of yourself to be true, and how you can expand your own business.
Absolutely. And that's why networking is such a cool thing to do, actually going out and meeting people who are in different fields as you, who maybe don't show up to the same conferences and workshops that you do, to see what else is possible. What kind of collaboration could benefit everyone more if we interacted with it? And how much more fun could we be having if we were expanding our realities or expanding our horizons in that way, with input from other modalities, other sources, other walks of life, for sure. It's really cool. So who is a great fit to come and work with you?
Good question. I guess someone who wants to look deeply and inward is what I've learned. I had a few exploration sessions this last week, and I guess a lot of people think about changing a career or a job is like, I need to edit my resume and then I'm done. I was like, it could be, but this transformation is a lot deeper. So anyone who's interested and introspective, like a lot of my clients are pretty reflective. I love their self-knowing, but they're looking for someone to be in partnership as a thinking partner, to talk out things, to make a decision. So someone I spoke to on the weekend was kind of like, well, I thought I just want to do this next, name the job, and you just would help me with my resume. But now you have me thinking about other options and I don't want to do that. So I was like, well, it doesn't sound like you're ready for coaching, or coaching might not be for you if you don't want to dig in. And I don't tell folks it's not therapy. Coaching looks different because you're looking forward. But instead of those surfacey conversations, we get to so what's the real problem here? We get to the root, and digging deep down and diving deep really fast is not comfortable for everyone. And not everyone's headspace or physical wellness space is the right time. So I've had clients come to me and say, I'm with a clinical therapist, I'm just really burnt out. I said, I'm around. You don't need to come to coaching right away, but we're one of the many things you should do. You could find a consultant. You could also find a financial advisor, a social worker, a therapist, and there's a team of people around to support you. So I always say, you're your best self when you're ready to dive deep, and you're also okay with knowing that there might be some unintended consequences of talking to a coach, because it's not around coaching a problem, it's coaching the person and the client. So I won't coach you out of that problem, but I'll talk with you about what you're feeling, about what you're thinking, and then what do you want to do? Because I think the answer is always within the person I'm usually meeting with.
Totally. I love that. What's the best place for people to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm Googleable on the internet, Laura Pasquini, but technotools.com is my main website. I do coaching, consulting, and things like that. And then I just do fun design projects on the side for folks who want a quick explainer videos to, you want to start your own podcast, because I have a podcast problem. So yeah, find me on there. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and happy to connect and have a conversation with anyone. Open to that. And I love that you've opened the door to me and invited me into your community, Molly. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your magic. And I also got to guest on Laura's podcast, so everybody can keep an eye out for that. And we'll put the link to Laura Pasquini's website on the show notes of this episode, so that you guys can go and check that out. Any last words of wisdom you want to leave people with?
Yeah, I'd say, like most people out there putting themselves online and doing work in the world, you only get to see a glimpse of what's in that iceberg, right? In that perspective. So don't assume it's all going well, and they're probably paddling under the water like you are on the tops, just coasting. So think about, you're not alone, and you just got to be open to having the conversation to ask more about it.
Awesome. Dig deeper. Love it. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for being on the show. And thank you, everyone out there, for listening and watching and tuning in. Speaking of building community, we do have a Tactical Magic podcast Facebook group if you want to come and hang out in there. We like to notify you of new episodes in there, and there can be an ongoing discussion. Also, we have Patreon links set up. If you go to wildheartsriseup.com/podcast and find Tactical Magic. If you'd like to support this podcast to remain commercial free, you can head on over there. And for less than the price of a cup of coffee a month, you could support this podcast. But whatever happens, keep asking big questions and taking bold action. And don't forget that you are here for a reason. Have a wonderful day.